Welcome to our channel. Remember to like and subscribe to get more stories daily. Now let's get to today's story, Space Prison. Original title, The Survivors, by Tom Godwin. After 2 centuries, the sound came swiftly nearer, rising in pitch and swelling in volume. Then it broke through the clouds, tall and black and beautifully deadly, the Jern battle cruiser, come to seek them out and destroy them. Humboldt dropped inside the stockade, exulting. For 200 years, his people had been waiting for the chance to fight the mighty Jern Empire, with bows and arrows against blasters and bombs. Part 4. John Humboldt, leader, stood on the wide stockade wall and watched the lowering sun touch the western horizon far south of where it had set when he was a child. Big summer was over, and now, in the year 200, they were already 3 years into Big Fall. The crags had been impassable with snow for 5 years, and the country at the north end of the plateau, where the iron had been found, had been buried under never-melting snow and growing glaciers for 20 years. There came the soft tinkling of ceramic bells as the herd of milk goats came down off the hills. 2 children were following, and 6 prowlers walked with them to protect them from wild unicorns. There were not many of the goats. Each year the winters were longer, requiring the stocking of a larger supply of hay. The time would come when the summers would be so short and the winters so long that they could not keep goats at all. And by then, when big winter had closed in on them, the summer seasons would be too short for the growing of the orange corn. They would have nothing left but the hunting. They had, he knew, reached and passed the zenith of the development of their environment. From a low of 49 men, women and children in dark caves, they had risen to a town of 6,000. For a few years they had had a way of life that was almost a civilization, but the inevitable decline was already underway. The years of frozen sterility of big winter were coming, and no amount of determination or ingenuity could alter them. 6,000 would have to live by hunting, and 100, in the first big winter, had found barely enough game. It would have to migrate in one of 2 different ways. They could go to the south as nomad hunters, or they could go to other, fairer worlds in ships they took from the Jerns. The choice was very easy to make, and they were almost ready. In the workshop at the farther edge of town, the hyperspace transmitter was nearing completion. The little smelter was waiting to receive the lathe and other iron and steel and turn them into the castings for the generator. Their weapons were ready. The markers were trained. The prowlers were waiting, and in the massive corral beyond town, 40 half-tame unicorns trampled the ground and hated the world, wanting to kill something. They had learned to be afraid of Ragnarok men, but they would not be afraid to kill Jerns. The children with the goats reached the stockade, and 2 of the prowlers, Fenrir and Sigyn, turned to see him standing on the wall. He made a little motion with his hand, and they came running, to leap up beside him on the 10-foot-high wall. "So you've been checking up on how well the young ones guard the children?" he asked. Sigyn lolled out her tongue, and her white teeth grinned at him in answer. Fenrir, always the grimmer of the 2, made a sound in his throat in reply. Prowlers developed something like a telepathic rapport with their masters and could sense their thoughts and understand relatively complex instructions. Their intelligence was greater and of a far more mature order than that of the little markers, but their vocal cords were not capable of making the sounds necessary for speech. He rested his hands on their shoulders, where their ebony fur was frosted with gray. Age had not yet affected their quick, flowing movement, but they were getting old. They were only a few weeks short of his own age. He could not remember when they had not been with him. Sometimes it seemed to him he could remember those hungry days when he and Fenrir and Sigyn shared together in his mother's lap. But it was probably only his imagination from having heard the story told so often. But he could remember for certain when he was learning to walk and Fenrir and Sigyn, full grown then, walked tall and black beside him. He could remember playing with Sigyn's pups, and he could remember Sigyn watching over them all, sometimes giving her pups a bath and his face, a washing with equal disregard for their and his protests. Above all, he could remember the times when he was almost grown, the wild, free days when he and Fenrir and Sigyn had roamed the mountains together. With a bow and a knife and 2 prowlers beside him, he had felt that there was nothing on Ragnarok that they could not conquer, that there was nothing in the universe they could not defy together. There was a flicker of black movement, and a young messenger prowler came running from the direction of the council hall, a speckle-faced marker clinging to its back. It leaped up on the wall beside him, and the marker, one that had been trained to remember and repeat messages verbatim, took a breath so deep that its cheeks bulged out. It spoke, in a quick rush like a child that is afraid it might forget some of the words. You will please come to the council hall to lead the discussion regarding the last preparations for the meeting with the Journs. The transmitter is completed. The lathe was torn down the next day, and the smelter began to roar with its forced draft. Excitement and anticipation ran through the town like a fever. It would take perhaps 20 days to build the generator, working day and night so that not an hour of time would be lost. 40 days for the signal to reach Athena, and 40 days for the Journ cruiser to reach Ragnarok. In 100 days, the Journs would be there. The men who would engage in the fight for the cruiser quit trimming their beards. Later, when it was time for the Journs to appear, they would discard their woolen garments for ones of goat skin. The Journs would regard them as primitive inferiors at best, and it might be of advantage to heighten the impression. It would make the awakening of the Journs a little more shocking. An underground passage, leading from the town to the concealment of the woods in the distance, had long ago been dug. Through it, the women and children would go when the Journs arrived. There was a level area of ground, just beyond the south wall of town, where the cruiser would be almost certain to land. The town had been built with that thought in mind. Woods were not far from both sides of the landing site, and unicorn corrals were hidden in them. From the corrals would come the rear flanking attack against the Journs. The prowlers, of course, would be scattered among all the forces. The generator was completed and installed on the 19th night. Charlie Craig, a giant of a man whose red beard gave him a genially murderous appearance, opened the valve of the water pipe. The new wooden turbine stirred, and belts and pulleys began to spin. The generator hummed, the needles of the dials climbed, flickered, and steadied. Norman Lake looked from them to Humboldt, his pale grey eyes coldly satisfied. "Full output," he said. "We have the power we need this time." Jim Chiara was at the transmitter, and they waited while he threw switches and studied dials. Every component of the transmitter had been tested, but they had not had the power to test the complete assembly. "That's it," he said at last, looking up at them. "She's ready, after almost 200 years of wanting her." Humboldt wondered what the signal should be, and saw no reason why it should not be the same one that had been sent out with such hope 165 years ago. "All right, Jim," he said. "Let the Journs know we're waiting for them. Make it Ragnarok calling again." The transmitter key rattled, and the all-wave signal that the Journs could not fail to receive went out at a velocity of 5 light-years a day. Ragnarok calling, Ragnarok calling, Ragnarok calling. It was the longest summer Humboldt had ever experienced. He was not alone in his impatience among all of them. The restlessness flamed higher as the slow days dragged by, making it almost impossible to go about their routine duties. The gentle markers sensed the anticipation of their masters for the coming battle, and they became nervous and apprehensive. The prowlers sensed it, and they paced about the town in the dark of night, watching, listening, on ceaseless guard against the mysterious enemy their masters waited for. Even the unicorns seemed to sense what was coming, and they rumbled and squealed in their corrals at night, red-eyed with the lust for blood, and sometimes attacking the log walls with blows that shook the ground. The interminable days went their slow succession, and summer gave way to fall. The 100th day dawned, cold and grey with the approach of winter, the day of the Journs. But no cruiser came that day, nor the next. He stood again on the stockade wall in the evening of the 3rd day, Fenrir and Sigyn beside him. He listened for the first dim, distant sound of the Journ cruiser and heard only the moaning of the wind around him. Winter was coming, always on Ragnarok. Winter was coming, or the brown death of summer. Ragnarok was a harsh and barren prison, and no amount of desire could ever make it otherwise. Only the coming of a Journ cruiser could ever offer them the bloody, violent opportunity to regain their freedom. But what if the cruiser never came? It was a thought too dark and hopeless to be held. They were not asking a large favor of fate after 200 years of striving for it, only the chance to challenge the Journ Empire with bows and knives. Fenrir stiffened, the fur lifting on his shoulders, and a muted growl coming from him. Then Humboldt heard the first whisper of sound, a faint, far-away roaring that was not the wind. He watched and listened, and the sound came swiftly nearer, rising in pitch and swelling in volume. Then it broke through the clouds, tall and black and beautifully deadly. It rode down on its rockets of flame, filling the valley with its thunder, and his heart hammered with exultation. It had come, the cruiser had come. He turned and dropped the 10 feet to the ground inside the stockade. The warning signal was being sounded from the center of town, a unicorn horn that gave out the call they had used in the practice alarms. Already, the women and children would be hurrying along the tunnels that led to the temporary safety of the woods beyond town. The Gerns might use their turret blasters to destroy the town, and all in it before the night was over. There was no way of knowing what might happen before it ended. But whatever it was, it would be the action they had all been wanting. He ran to where the others would be gathering, Fenrir and Sigyn loping beside him, and the horn ringing wild and savage and triumphant as it announced the end of 2 centuries of waiting. The cruiser settled to earth in the area where it had been expected to land, towering high above the town, with its turret blasters looking down upon the houses. Charlie Craig and Norman Lake were waiting for him on the high steps of his own house, in the center of town, where the elevation gave them a good view of the ship, yet where the fringes of the canopy would conceal them from the ship's scanners. They were heavily armed, their prowlers beside them and their markers on their shoulders. Elsewhere, under the connected rows of concealing canopies, armed men were hurrying to their prearranged stations. Most of them were accompanied by prowlers, bristling and snarling as they looked at the alien ship. A few men were deliberately making themselves visible not far away, going about unimportant tasks with only occasional and carefully disinterested glances toward the ship. They were the bait to lure the first detachment into the center of town. "Well," Norman Lake asked, his pale eyes restless with his hunger for violence. "There's our ship. When do we take her?" "Just as soon as we get them outside it," he said. "We'll use the plan we first had, wait until they send a full force to rescue the first detachment, and then hit them with everything we have." His black, white-nosed marker was standing in the open doorway and watching the hurrying men and prowlers with worried interest. Tip, the great-great-great-great-grandson of the marker that had died with Howard Lake north of the plateau. He reached down to pick him up and set him on his shoulder and said, "Jim, the longbows are ready." Tip's treble imitation of Jim Chiara's voice answered, "We'll black out their searchlights when the time comes." "Andy," he asked, "the last of us for this section are coming in now." Andy Taylor answered. He made his check of all the subleaders, then looked up to the roof to ask, "All set, Jimmy?" Jimmy Stevens' grinning face appeared over the edge. 10 crossbows are cocked and waiting up here. Bring us our targets." They waited while the evening deepened into near dusk. Then the airlock of the cruiser slid open and 13 Gerns emerged, the one leading them wearing the resplendent uniform of a sub-commander. "There they come," he said to Lake and Craig. "It looks like we'll be able to trap them in here and force the commander to send out a full-sized force. We'll all attack at the sound of the horn, and if you can hit their rear flanks hard enough with the unicorns to give us a chance to split them from this end, some of us should make it to the ship before they realize up in the control room that they should close the airlocks. Now." He looked at the Gerns who were coming straight toward the stockade wall, ignoring the gate to their right. "You'd better be on your way. We'll meet again before long in the ship." Fenrir and Sigyn looked from the advancing Gerns to him with question in their eyes after Lake and Craig were gone, Fenrir growling restlessly. "Pretty soon," he said to them. "Right now it would be better if they didn't see you. Wait inside, both of you." They went reluctantly inside to merge with the darkness of the interior. Only an occasional yellow gleam of their eyes showed that they were crouched to spring just inside the doorway. He called to the nearest unarmed man, not loud enough to be heard by the Gerns. "Cliff, you and Sam Anders come here. Tell the rest to fade out of sight and get armed." Cliff Schroeder passed the command along, and he and Sam Anders approached. He looked back at the Gerns and saw they were within 100 feet of the, for them, unscalable wall of the stockade. They were coming without hesitation. A pale blue beam lashed down from one of the cruiser's turrets, and a 50-foot section of the wall erupted into dust with a sound like thunder. The wind swept the dust aside in a gigantic cloud, and the Gerns came through the gap, looking neither to right nor left. "That, I suppose," Sam Anders said from beside him, "was lesson number 1 for degenerate savages like us. Gerns, like guards, are not to be hindered by man-made barriers." The Gerns walked with a peculiar gait that puzzled him until he saw what it was. They were trying to come with the arrogant military stride affected by the Gerns, and in the one 5 gravity, they were succeeding in achieving only a heavy clumping. They advanced steadily, and as they drew closer, he saw that in the right hand of each Jern soldier was a blaster, while in the left hand of each could be seen the metallic glitter of chains. Schroeder smiled thinly. It looks like they want to subject about a dozen of us to some painful questioning. No one else was any longer in sight, and the Jerns came straight toward the 3 on the steps. They stopped 40 feet away at a word of command from the officer, and Jerns and Ragnarok men exchanged silent stares. The faces of the Ragnarok men bearded and expressionless, the faces of the Jerns hairless and reflecting a contemptuous curiosity. Narth, the communicator on the Jern officer's belt, spoke with metallic authority. What do they look like? Did we come 200 light years to view some animated vegetables? No, Commander, Narth answered. I think the discard of the rejects 200 years ago has produced for us an unexpected reward. There are 3 natives under the canopy before me, and their physical perfection and complete adaptation to this hellish gravity is astonishing. They could be used to replace expensive machines on some of the outer world mines, the commander said, providing their intelligence isn't too abysmally low. What about that? They can surely be taught to perform simple manual labor. Narth answered. Get on with your job, the commander said. Try to pick some of the most intelligent-looking ones for questioning. I can't believe these cattle sent that message, and they're going to tell us who did. And pick some young, strong ones for the medical staff to examine ones that won't curl up and die after the first few cuts of the knife. We'll chain these 3 first, Narth said. He lifted his hand in an imperious gesture to Humboldt and the other 2 and ordered in accented Terran, "Come here." No one moved, and he said again, sharply, "Come here." Again no one moved, and the minor officer beside Narth said, "Apparently they can't even understand Terran now. Then we'll give them some action they can understand." Narth snapped, his face flushing with irritation. "We'll drag them out by their heels." The Jerns advanced purposefully, 3 of them holstering their blasters to make their chains ready. When they had passed under the canopy and could not be seen from the ship, Humboldt spoke. "All right, Jimmy." The Jerns froze in mid-stride, suspicion flashing across their faces. "Look up on the roof," he said in Jern. They looked, and the suspicion became gaping dismay. "You can be our prisoners or you can be corpses," he said. "We don't care which." The urgent hiss of Narth's command broke their indecision. "Kill them." 6 of them tried to obey, bringing up their blasters in movements that seemed curiously heavy and slow, as though the gravity of Ragnarok had turned their arms to wood. 3 of them almost lifted their blasters high enough to fire at the steps in front of them before arrows went through their throats. The other 3 did not get that far. Narth and the remaining 6 went rigidly motionless, and he said to them, "Drop your blasters quick." Their blasters thumped to the ground, and Jimmy Stevens and his bowmen slid off the roof. Within a minute the Jerns were bound with their own chains, but for the officer, and the blasters were in the hands of the Ragnarok men. Jimmy looked down the row of Jerns and shook his head. "So these are Jerns," he said. "It was like trapping a band of woods goats." "Young ones," Schroeder amended, "and almost as dangerous." Narth's face flushed at the words, and his eyes went to the ship. The sight of it seemed to restore his courage, and his lips drew back in a snarl. "You fools, you stupid, megalomaniac dung heaps. Do you think you can kill Jerns and live to boast about it?" "Keep quiet," Humboldt ordered, studying him with curiosity. Narth, like all the Jerns, was different from what they had expected. It was true the Jerns had strode into their town with an attempt at arrogance, but they were harmless in appearance, soft of face and belly, and the snarling of the red-faced Narth was like the bluster of a cornered scavenger rodent. "I promise you this," Narth was saying viciously. "If you don't release us and return our weapons this instant, I'll personally oversee the extermination of you and every savage in this village with the most painful death science can contrive, and I'll—" Humboldt reached out his hand and flicked Narth under the chin. Narth's teeth cracked loudly together, and his face twisted with the pain of a bitten tongue. "Tie him up, Jess," he said to a man near him. "If he opens his mouth again, shove your foot in it." He spoke to Schroeder. "We'll keep 3 of the blasters and send 2 to each of the other front groups. Have that done." Dusk was deepening into darkness, and he called Chiara again. "They'll turn on their searchlights any minute and make the town as light as day," he said. "If you can keep them blacked out until some of us have reached the ship, I think we'll have won." "They'll be kept blacked out," Chiara said, with some flint-headed arrows left over for the Jerns. He called Lake and Craig to be told they were ready and waiting. But we're having hell keeping the unicorns quiet, Craig said. They want to get to killing something. He pressed the switch of the communicator, but it was dead. They had, of course, transferred to some other wavelength, so he could not hear the commands. It was something he had already anticipated. Fenrir and Sigyn were still obediently inside the doorway, almost frantic with desire to rejoin him. He spoke to them and they bounded out, snarling at 3 Jerns in passing and causing them to blanch to a dead white color. He set Tip on Sigyn's shoulders and said, "Sigyn, there's a job for you and Tip to do. A dangerous job. Listen, both of you." The yellow eyes of Sigyn and the dark eyes of the little marker looked into his as he spoke to them and accompanied his words with the strongest, clearest mental images he could project. "Sigyn, take Tip to the Nartmen thing. Leave him hidden in the grass to one side of the big hole in it. Tip, you wait there. When the Nartmen come out, you listen and tell what they say. Now, do you both understand?" Sigyn made a sound that meant she did, but Tip clutched at his wrist with little paws suddenly gone cold and wailed, "No, scared. You have to go, Tip," he said, gently disengaging his wrist. "And Sigyn will hide near to you and watch over you." He spoke to Sigyn. "When the horn calls, you run back with him." Again, she made the sound signifying understanding, and he touched them both in what he hoped would not be the last farewell. "All right, Sigyn, go now." She vanished into the gloom of coming night, Tip hanging tightly to her. Fenrir stood with the fur lifted on his shoulders and a half snarl on his face as he watched her go and watched the place where the Nartmen would appear. "Where's Freckles?" he asked Jimmy. "Here," someone said, and came forward with Tip's mate, set Freckles on his shoulder, and the first searchlight came on, shining down from high up on the cruiser. It lighted up the area around them in harsh white brilliance, its reflection revealing the black shadow that was Sigyn just vanishing behind the ship. 2 more searchlights came on to illuminate the town. Then the Jerns came. They poured out through the airlock and down the ramp, there to form in columns that marched forward as still more Jerns hurried down the ramp behind them. The searchlights gleamed on their battle helmets and on the blades of the bayonets affixed to their rifle-like long-range blasters. Hand blasters and grenades hung from their belts, together with stubby flame guns. They were a solid mass, reaching halfway to the stockade before the last of them, the commanding officers, appeared. One of them stopped at the foot of the ramp to watch the advance of the punitive force and give the frightened but faithful Tip the first words to transmit to Freckles. "The full force is on its way, Commander." A reply came in Freckles' simulation of the metallic tones of a communicator. "The key numbers of the confiscated blasters have been checked and the disturbance rays of the master integrator set. You'll probably have few natives left alive to take as prisoners after those 13 charges explode, but continue with a mopping up job that the survivors will never forget." So the Jerns could, by remote control, set the total charges of stolen blasters to explode upon touching the firing stud. It was something new since the days of the old ones. He called Chiara and the other groups quickly to tell them what he had learned. "We'll get more blasters ones they can't know the numbers of when we attack," he finished. He took the blaster from his belt and laid it on the ground. The front ranks of the Jerns were almost to the wall by then, a column wider than the gap that had been blasted through it, coming with silent purposefulness. 2 blaster beams lanced down from the turrets to smash at the wall. Dust billowed and thunder rumbled as they swept along. A full 300 feet of the wall had been destroyed when they stopped, and the dust hid the ship and made dim glows of the searchlights. It had no doubt been intended to impress them with the might of the Jerns, but in doing so it hid the Ragnarok forces from the advancing Jerns for a few seconds. "Jim, black out their lights before the dust clears," he called. "Joe the horn, we attack now." The first longbow arrow struck a searchlight, and its glow grew dimmer as the arrow's burden, a thin tube of thick lance tree ink, splattered against it. Another followed, then the horn rang out, harsh and commanding, and in the distance, a unicorn screamed in answer. The savage cry of a prowler came, like a sound to match, and the attack was on. He ran with Fenrir beside him, and to his left and right ran the others with their prowlers. The lead groups converged as they went through the wide gap in the wall. They ran on into the dust cloud, and the shadowy forms of the Jerns were suddenly before them. A blaster beam cut into them, and a Jern shouted, "The natives!" Other beams sprang into life, winking like pale blue eyes through the dust and killing all they touched. The beams dropped as the first volley of arrows tore through the massed front ranks to be replaced by others. They charged on, into the blue winking of the blasters and the red lances of the flame guns, with the crossbows rattling and strumming in answer. The prowlers lunged and fought beside them and ahead of them, black hell creatures that struck the gerns too swiftly for blasters to find before throats were torn out. The sound of battle turned into a confusion of raging snarls, frantic shouts, and dying screams. A prowler shot past him to join Fenrir Sigyn, and he felt Tip dart up to his shoulder. She made a sound of greeting in passing, a sound that was gone as her jaws closed on a gern. The dust cloud cleared a little, and the searchlights looked down on the scene, no longer brilliantly white, but shining through the red-black lance tree ink as a blood-red glow. A searchlight turret slid shut, and opened a moment later, the light wiped clean. The longbows immediately transformed it into a red glow. The beam of one of the turret blasters stabbed down, to blaze a trail of death through the battle. It ceased as its own light revealed to the Gern commander that the Ragnarok forces were so intermixed with the Gern forces that he was killing more Gerns than Ragnarok men. By then, the fighting was so hand-to-hand that knives were better than crossbows. The Gerns fell like harvested corn, too slow and awkward to use their bayonets against the faster Ragnarok men, and killing as many of one another as men when they tried to use their blasters and flame guns. From the rear, there came the command of a Gern officer, shouted high and thin above the sound of battle. Back to the ship leave the natives for the ship's blasters to kill. The unicorns arrived then, to cut off their retreat. They came 20 from the east and 20 from the west in a thunder of hooves, squealing and screaming in their bloodlust, with prowlers, a black wave going before them. They struck the Gerns, the prowlers slashing lanes through them while the unicorns charged behind, trampling them, ripping into them with their horns, and smashing them down with their hooves as they vented the pent-up rage of their years of confinement. On the back of each was a rider whose long spear flicked and stabbed into the throats and bellies of Gerns. The retreat was halted and transformed into milling confusion. He led his own groups in the final charge, the prearranged wedge attack, and they split the Gern force in two. The ship was suddenly just beyond them. He gave the last command to Lake and Craig, "Now into the ship." He scooped up a blaster from beside a fallen Gern and ran toward it. A Gern officer was already in the airlock, his face pale and strained as he looked back and his hand on the closing switch. He shot him and ran up the ramp as the officer's body rolled down it. Unicorn hooves pounded behind him, and 20 of them swept past, their riders leaping from their backs to the ramp. 20 men and 15 prowlers charged up the ramp as a warning siren shrieked somewhere inside the ship. At the same time, the airlocks, operated from the control room, began to slide swiftly shut. He was through first, with Fenrir and Sigyn. Lake and Craig, together with 6 men and 4 prowlers, squeezed through barely in time. Then the airlocks were closed, and they were sealed in the ship. Alarm bells added their sound to the shrieking of the siren, and from the multiple compartment shafts came the whir of elevators dropping with Gern forces to kill the humans trapped inside the ship. They ran past the elevator shafts without pausing, light and swift in the artificial gravity that was only 2/3 that of Ragnarok. They split forces as long ago planned. 3 men and 4 prowlers going with Charlie Craig in the attempt to take the drive room, Lake and the other 3 men going with him in the attempt to take the control room. They found the manway ladder and began to climb, Fenrir and Sigyn impatiently crowding their heels. There was nothing on the control room level, and they ran down the short corridor that their maps had showed. They turned left, into the corridor that had the control room at its end, and into the concentrated fire of 9 wading Gerns. Fenrir and Sigyn went into the Gerns, under their fire before they could drop the muzzles of their blasters, with an attack so vicious and unexpected that what would have been a certain and lethal trap for the humans was suddenly a fighting chance. The corridor became an inferno of blaster beams that cracked and hissed as they met and crossed, throwing little chips of metal from the walls with snapping sounds, and going through flesh with sounds like soft tappings. It was over within seconds, the last Gern down, and 1 man still standing beside him, the blonde and nerveless Lake. Thompson and Barber were dead, and Billy West was bracing himself against the wall with a blaster hole through his stomach, trying to say something and sliding to the floor before it was ever spoken. and Sigyn was down, blood welling and bubbling from a wound in her chest, while Fenrir stood over her with his snarling a raging scream as he swung his head in search of a still-living Jern. Humboldt and Lake ran on, Fenrir raging beside them, and into the control room. 6 officers, one wearing the uniform of a commander, were gaping in astonishment and bringing up their blasters in the way that seemed so curiously slow to Humboldt. Fenrir, in his fury, killed 2 of them as Lake's blaster and his own killed 3 more. The commander was suddenly alone, his blaster half lifted. Fenrir leaped at his throat, and Humboldt shouted the quick command, "Disarm." It was something the Prowlers had been taught in their training, and Fenrir's teeth clicked short of the commander's throat, while his paw sent the blaster spinning across the room. The commander stared at them with his swarthy face a dark grey, and his mouth still gaping. How did you do it?" he asked in heavily accented Terran. "Only 2 of you. Don't talk until you're asked a question," Lake said. "Only 2 of you." The thought seemed to restore his courage, as sight of the ship had restored Narth's that night, and his tone became threatening. "There are only 2 of you, and more guards will be here to kill you within a minute. Surrender to me, and I'll let you go free." Lake slapped him across the mouth with a backhanded blow that snapped his head back on his shoulders and split his lip. "Don't talk," he ordered again, "and never lie to us." The commander spit out a tooth and held his hand to his bleeding mouth. He did not speak again. Tip and Freckles were holding tightly to his shoulder and each other, the racing of their hearts like a vibration, and he touched them reassuringly. "All right now, all safe now," he said. He called Charlie Craig. "Charlie, did you make it?" "We made it to the drive room, 2 of us and 1 prowler," Charlie answered. "What about you?" "Norman and I have the control room. Cut their drives to play safe. I'll let you know as soon as the entire ship is ours." He went to the view screen and saw that the battle was over. Chiara was letting the searchlight burn again, and prowlers were being used to drive back the unicorns from the surrendering Jerns. "I guess we won," he said to Lake, but there was no feeling of victory, none of the elation he had thought he would have. Sigyn was dying alone in the alien corridor outside. Sigyn, who had nursed beside him and fought beside him and laid down her life for him. "I want to look at her," he said to Lake. Fenrir went with him. She was still alive, waiting for them to come back to her. She lifted her head and touched his hand with her tongue as he examined the wound. It was not fatal, it need not be fatal. He worked swiftly, gently, to stop the bleeding that had been draining her life away. She would have to lie quietly for weeks, but she would recover. When he was done, he pressed her head back to the floor and said, "Lie still, Sigyn girl, until we can come to move you. Wait for us and Fenrir will stay here with you." She obeyed, and he left them, the feeling of victory and elation coming to him in full then. Lake looked at him questioningly as he entered the control room, and he said, "She'll live." He turned to the Jern commander. "First, I want to know how the war is going." The commander looked uncertainly at Lake. "Just tell the truth," Lake said, "whether you think we'll like it or not." "We have all the planets but Earth itself," the commander said. "We'll have it soon. And the Terrans on Athena, they're still working for us there. Now," he said, "you will order every Jern in this ship to go to his sleeping quarters. They will leave their weapons in the corridors outside, and they will not resist the men who will come to take charge of the ship." The commander made an effort toward defiance. "And if I refuse?" Lake answered, smiling at him with the smile of his that was no more than a quick showing of teeth, and with the savage eagerness in his eyes. "If you refuse, I'll start with your fingers and break every bone to your shoulders. If that isn't enough, I'll start with your toes and go to your hips, and then I'll break your back." The commander hesitated, sweat filming his face as he looked at them. Then he reached out to switch on the all-stations communicator and say into it, "Attention, all personnel. You will return to your quarters at once, leaving your weapons in the corridors. You are ordered to make no resistance when the natives come." There was a silence when he had finished, and Humboldt and Lake looked at each other, bearded and clad in animal skins, but standing at last in the control room of a ship that was theirs, in a ship that could take them to Athena, to Earth, to the ends of the galaxy. The commander watched them, on his face the blankness of unwillingness to believe. "The airlocks," he said. "We didn't close them in time. We never thought you would dare try to take the ship, not savages in animal skins." "I know," Humboldt answered. "We were counting on you to think that way. No one expected any of you to survive here." The commander wiped at his swollen lips, wincing, and an almost childlike petulance came into his tone. "You weren't supposed to survive. I know, he said again. We've made it a point to remember that. The gravity, the heat and cold and fever, the animals, why didn't they kill you? They tried, he said, but we fought back, and we had a goal to meet you Gerns again. You left us on a world that had no resources, only enemies who would kill us, the gravity, the prowlers, the unicorns, so we made them our resources. We adapted to the gravity that was supposed to kill us and became stronger and quicker than Gerns. We made allies of the prowlers and unicorns who were supposed to be our executioners and used them tonight to help us kill Gerns. So now we have your ship. Yes, you have our ship. Through the unwillingness to believe on the commander's face and the petulance, there came the triumph of vindictive anticipation. The savages of Ragnarok have a Gern cruiser, but what can they do with it? What can we do with it? He asked, almost kindly. We've planned for 200 years what we can do with it. We have the cruiser, and 60 days from now we'll have Athena. That will be only the beginning, and you Gerns are going to help us do it. For 6 days, the ship was a scene of ceaseless activity. Men crowded it, asking questions of the Gern officers and crew, and calmly breaking the bones of those who refused to answer or who gave answers that were not true. Prowlers stalked the corridors, their cold yellow eyes watching every move the Gerns made. The little markers began roaming the ship at will, unable any longer to restrain their curiosity and confident that the men and prowlers would not let the Gerns harm them. One marker was killed then, the speckle-faced marker that could repeat messages verbatim. It wandered into a storage cubicle where a Gern was working alone and gave him the opportunity to safely vent his hatred of everything associated with the men of Ragnarok. He broke its back with a steel bar and threw it, screaming, into the disposal chute that led to the matter converter. A prowler heard the scream, and an instant later the Gern screamed, a sound that died in its making as the prowler tore his throat out. No more markers were harmed. One Ragnarok boy was killed. 3 fanatical Gern officers stole knives from the galley and held the boy as hostage for their freedom. When their demands were refused, they cut his heart out. Lake cornered them a few minutes later, and without touching his blaster, disemboweled them with their own knives. He smiled down upon them as they writhed and moaned on the floor, and their moans were heard for a long time by the other Gerns in the ship before they died. No more humans were harmed. They discovered that operation of the cruiser was relatively simple, basically similar to the operation of Terran ships, as described in the textbook the original Lake had written. Most of the operations were performed by robot mechanisms, and the manual operations, geared to the slower reflexes of the Gerns, were easily mastered. They could spend the 40-day voyage to Athena in further learning and practice, so on the 6th day they prepared to depart. The unicorns had been given the freedom they had fought so well for, and reconnaissance vehicles were loaned from the cruiser to take their place. Later there would be machinery and supplies of all kinds brought in by freighter ships from Athena. Time was precious, and there was a long, long job ahead of them. They blasted up from Ragnarok on the morning of the 7th day and went into the Black Sea of hyperspace. By then, the Gern commander was no longer of any value to them. His unwillingness to believe that savages had wrested his ship from him had increased until his compartment became his control room to him, and he spent the hours laughing and giggling before an imaginary viewscreen, whereon the cruiser's blasters were destroying, over and over, the Ragnarok town and all the humans in it. But Narth, who had wanted to have them tortured to death for daring to resist capture, became very cooperative. In the control room, his cooperation was especially eager. On the 20th day of the voyage, they let him have what he had been trying to gain by subterfuge, access to the transmitter when no men were within hearing distance. After that, his manner abruptly changed. Each day his hatred for them and his secret anticipation became more evident. The 35th day came, with Athena 5 days ahead of them, the day of the execution they had let him arrange for them. Stars filled the transdimensional viewscreen, the sun of Athena in the center. Humboldt watched the space to the lower left, and the flicker came again. A tiny red dart that was gone again within a microsecond, so quickly that Narth in the seat beside him did not see it. It was the quick peak of another ship. A ship that was running invisible with its detector screens up but which had had to drop them for an instant to look out at the cruiser. Not even the Jerns had ever been able to devise a polarized detector screen. He changed the course and speed of the cruiser, creating an increase in gravity, which seemed very slight to him, but which caused Narth to slew heavily in his seat. Narth straightened, and he said to him, "Within a few minutes we'll engage the ship you sent for." Narth's jaw dropped, then came back up. "So you spied on me." "One of our Ragnarok allies did the little animal that was sitting near the transmitter. They're our means of communication. We learned that you had arranged for a ship, en route to Athena, to intercept us and capture us. So you know?" Narth asked. He smiled, an unpleasant twisting of his mouth. "Do you think that knowing will help you any?" "We expect it to," he answered. "It's a battleship," Narth said. "It's 3 times the size of this cruiser, the newest and most powerful battleship in the Jern fleet. How does that sound to you?" "It sounds good," he said. "We'll make it our flagship." Your flagship. The last trace of pretense left Narth, and he let his full and rankling hatred come through. "You got this cruiser by trickery, and learned how to operate it after a fashion because of an animal-like reflex abnormality. For 42 days, you accidental mutants have given orders to your superiors and thought you were our equals. Now, your fool's paradise is going to end." The red dot came again, closer, and he once more altered the ship's course. He had turned on the course analyzer, and it clicked as the battleship's position was correlated with that of its previous appearance. A short yellow line appeared on the screen to forecast its course for the immediate future. "And then?" he asked curiously, turning back to Narth. "And then we'll take all of you left alive back to your village. The scenes of what we do to you and your village will be televised to all Jern-held worlds. It will be a valuable reminder for any who have forgotten the penalty for resisting Jerns." The red dot came again. He punched the battle station's button, and the board responded with a row of ready lights. "All the other Jerns are by now in their acceleration couches," he said. "Strap yourself in for high acceleration maneuvers. We'll make contact with the battleship within 2 minutes." Narth did so, taking his time as though it was something of little importance. "There will be no maneuvers. They'll blast the stern and destroy your drive immediately upon attack." He fastened the last strap and smiled, taunting assurance in the twisted unpleasantness of it. "The appearance of this battleship has very much disrupted your plans to strut like conquering heroes among the slaves on Athena, hasn't it?" "Not exactly," Humboldt replied. "Our plans are a little broader in scope than that. There are 2 new cruisers on Athena, ready to leave the shops 10 days from now. We'll turn control of Athena over to the humans there, of course. Then we'll take the 3 cruisers and the battleship back by way of Ragnarok. Then we'll pick up all the Ragnarok men who are neither too old nor too young and go on to Earth. They will be given training en route in the handling of ships. We expect to find no difficulty in breaking through the Jern lines around Earth, and then, with the addition of the Earth ships, we can easily capture all the Jern ships in the solar system." "Easily?" Narth made a contemptuous sneer of the word. "Were you actually so stupid as to think that you biological freaks could equal Jern officers who have made a career of space warfare?" "We'll far exceed them," he said. "A space battle is one of trying to keep your blaster beams long enough on one area of the enemy ship to break through its blaster shields at that point, and at the same time try to move and dodge fast enough to keep the enemy from doing the same thing to you. The ships are capable of accelerations up to 50 gravities or more, but the acceleration limitator is the safeguard that prevents the ship from going into such a high degree of acceleration or into such a sudden change of direction that it would kill the crew. We from Ragnarok are accustomed to a 1.5 gravity and can withstand much higher degrees of acceleration than Jerns or any other race from a 1-gravity world. To enable us to take advantage of that fact, we have had the acceleration limitator on this cruiser disconnected." "Disconnected?" Narth's contemptuous regard vanished in frantic consternation. "You fool, you don't know what that means. You'll move the acceleration lever too far and kill us all." The red dot flicked on the view screen, trembled, and was suddenly a gigantic battleship in full view. He touched the acceleration control, and Narth's next words were cut off as his diaphragm sagged. He swung the cruiser in a curve, and Narth was slammed sideways, the straps cutting into him and the flesh of his face pulled lopsided by the gravity. His eyes, bulging, went blank with unconsciousness. The powerful blasters of the battleship blossomed like a row of pale blue flowers, concentrating on the stern of the cruiser. A warning siren screeched as they started breaking through the cruiser's shields. He dropped the detector screen that would shield the cruiser from sight, but not from the blaster beams, and tightened the curve until the gravity dragged heavily at his own body. The warning siren stopped as the blaster beams of the battleship went harmlessly into space, continuing to follow the probability course plotted from the cruiser's last visible position and course by the battleship's robot target tracers. He lifted the detector screen to find the battleship almost exactly where the cruiser's course analyzers had predicted it would be. The blasters of the battleship were blazing their full concentration of firepower into an area behind and to one side of the cruiser. They blinked out at sight of the cruiser in its new position and blazed again a moment later, boring into the stern. He dropped the detector screen and swung the cruiser in another curve, spiraling in the opposite direction. As before, the screech of the alarm siren died as the battleship's blasters followed the course given them by course analyzers and target tracers that were built to presume that all enemy ships were acceleration limitator equipped. The cruiser could have destroyed the battleship at any time, but they wanted to capture their flagship unharmed. The maneuvering continued, the cruiser drawing closer to the battleship. The battleship, in desperation, began using the same hide-and-jump tactics the cruiser used, but it was of little avail. The battleship moved at known acceleration limits, and the cruiser's course analyzers predicted each new position with sufficient accuracy. The cruiser made its final dash in a tightening spiral, its detector screen flickering on and off. It struck the battleship at a matched speed, with a thump and ringing of metal as the magnetic grapples fastened the cruiser like a leech to the battleship's side. In that position, neither the forward nor stern blasters of the battleship could touch it. There remained only to convince the commander of the battleship that further resistance was futile. This he did with a simple ultimatum to the commander. This cruiser is firmly attached to your ship, its acceleration limitator disconnected. Its drives are of sufficient power to thrust both ships forward at a much higher degree of acceleration than persons from one-gravity worlds can endure. You will surrender at once, or we shall be forced to put these two ships into a curve of such short radius and at an acceleration so great that all of you will be killed. Then, he added, if you surrender, we'll do somewhat better by you than you did with the humans 200 years ago. We'll take all of you on to Athena. The commander, already sick from an acceleration that would have been negligible to Ragnarok men, had no choice. His reply came, choked with acceleration sickness and the greater sickness of defeat. We will surrender. Narth regained consciousness. He saw Humboldt sitting beside him as before, with no Jern rescuers crowding into the control room with shouted commands and drawn blasters. Where are they? He asked. Where is the battleship? We captured it, he said. You captured a Jern battleship. It wasn't hard, he said. It would have been easier if only Ragnarok men had been on the cruiser. We didn't want to accelerate to any higher gravities than absolutely necessary because of the Jerns on it. You did it, you captured the battleship, Narth said, his tone like one dazed. He wet his lips, staring as he contemplated the unpleasant implications of it. You're freak mutants who can capture a battleship. Maybe you will take Athena and Earth from us, but the animation of hatred returned to his face. What good will it do you? Did you ever think about that? Yes, he said. We've thought about it. Have you? Narth leaned forward, his face shining with the malice of his gloating. You can never escape the consequences of what you have done. The Jern Empire has the resources of dozens of worlds. The Empire will build a fleet of special ships, a force against which your own will be nothing, and send them to Earth and Athena and Ragnarok. The Empire will smash you for what you have done, and if there are any survivors of your race left, they will cringe before Jerns for 100 generations to come. Remember that while you're posturing in your little hour of glory on Athena and Earth. You insist in thinking we'll do as Jerns would do, he said. We won't delay to do any posturing. We'll have a large fleet when we leave Earth, and we'll go at once to engage the Jern home fleet. I thought you knew we were going to do that. We're going to cripple and capture your fleet, and then we're going to destroy your empire. Destroy the empire now. Narth stared again, all the gloating gone as he saw, at last, the quick and inexorable end. Now, before we can stop you, before we can have a chance. When a race has been condemned to die by another race, and it fights and struggles and manages somehow to survive, it learns a lesson. It learns it must never again let the other race be in position to destroy it. So this is the harvest you reap from the seeds you sowed on Ragnarok 200 years ago. You understand, don't you? He asked, almost gently. For 200 years, the Jern Empire has been a menace to our survival as a race. Now, the time has come when we shall remove it. He stood in the control room of the battleship and watched Athena's sun in the viewscreen, blazing like a white flame. Sigyn, fully recovered, was stretched out on the floor near him, twitching and snarling a little in her sleep as she fought again the battle with the Jerns. Fenrir was pacing the floor, swinging his black, massive head restlessly, while Tip and Freckles were examining with fascinated curiosity the collection of bright medals that had been cleaned out of the Jern commander's desk. Lake and Craig left their stations, as impatient as Fenrir, and came over to watch the viewscreen with him. "One day more," Craig said. "We're 200 years late, but we're coming into the world that was to have been our home." "It can never be now," he said. "Have any of us ever thought of that we're different to humans, and there's no human world we could ever call home?" "I've thought of it," Lake said. "Ragnarok made us different physically and different in the way we think. We could live on human worlds, but we would always be a race apart, and never really belong there." "I suppose we've all thought about it," Craig said, "and wondered what we'll do when we're finished with the Jerns, not settle down on Athena or Earth, in a little cottage with a fenced-in lawn where it would be adventure to watch the 3D shows after each day at some safe, routine job." "Not back to Ragnarok," Lake said. "With metals and supplies from other worlds, they'll be able to do a lot there, but the battle is already won. There will be left only the peaceful development building a town at the equator for big winter, leveling land, planting crops. We could never be satisfied with that kind of a life." "No," he said, and felt his own restlessness stir in protest at the thought of settling down in some safe and secure environment. "Not Athena or Earth or Ragnarok, not any world we know." "How long until we're finished with the Jerns?" Lake asked. 10 years. We'll still be young then. Where will we go, all of us who fought the Jerns, and all of the ones in the future who won't want to live out their lives on Ragnarok? Where is there a place for us, a world of our own? Where do we find a world of our own?" he asked, and watched the star clouds creep toward them in the viewscreen, tumbled and blazing and immense beyond conception. "There's a galaxy for us to explore," he said. "There are millions of suns and thousands of worlds waiting for us. Maybe there are races out there like the Jerns, and maybe there are races, such as we were 100 years ago, who need our help. And maybe there are worlds out there with things on them such as no man ever imagined. We'll go to see what's there. Our women will go with us, and there will be some worlds on which some of us will want to stay. And always, there will be more restless ones coming from Ragnarok. Out there are the worlds and the homes for all of us." "Of course," Lake said. "Beyond the space frontier, where else would we ever belong?" It was all settled then, and there was a silence as the battleship plunged through hyperspace, the cruiser running beside her, and their drives moaning and thundering, as had the drives of the Constellation 200 years before. A voyage had been interrupted then, and a new race had been born. Now they were going on again, to Athena, to Earth, to the farthest reaches of the Jern Empire, and on to the wild, unknown regions of space beyond. There awaited their worlds, and there awaited their destiny, to be a race scattered across 100,000 light-years of suns, to be an empire such as the galaxy had never known. They, the restless ones, the unwanted and forgotten, the survivors. The END thanks for joining me on this cosmic journey. Like and subscribe for daily sci-fi stories. Until tomorrow, keep looking up at the stars.